King James I of England, 1566 to 1625, was a monarch whose reign had a profound impact on the political, religious, and cultural life of England. Ascending the English throne in 1603, after the death of Queen Elizabeth I, James was the first monarch to rule both England and Scotland, a union of crowns that would eventually lead to the formation of Great Britain. His reign, which lasted from 1603 until his death in 1625, was a time of political turbulence, religious conflict, and cultural growth. James's reign is particularly notable for the religious and political challenges he faced, including attempts to balance the demands of both the Anglican Church and the growing Puritan movement. He also presided over the early stages of colonial expansion and the English involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Perhaps most famously, James I is remembered for commissioning the King James Bible, one of the most significant and enduring cultural achievements of his reign. Despite his many accomplishments, James's rule was also marked by tensions with Parliament, which would ultimately set the stage for the English Civil War after his son, Charles I, succeeded him. His policies and approaches to governance, his often contradictory views on monarchy, and his failure to manage political factions effectively contributed to the gradual erosion of royal power in England. James VI of Scotland was born on June 19, 1566, to Mary, Queen of Scots, and her second husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. His early life was marked by instability and intrigue, as his mother's reign was embroiled in political turmoil. Mary's forced abdication in 1567, when James was just a year old, thrust him onto the Scottish throne as James VI. He was raised under the watchful eyes of regents and advisors who helped manage the kingdom in his infancy. James was well educated, particularly in classical languages, theology, and politics, which prepared him for the eventual role he would play as a monarch. Although he was a king from birth, his rule over Scotland was not without significant internal and external challenges. These included religious divisions between Protestants and Catholics, as well as the power struggles among Scotland's nobility. However, by the time of his ascension to the English throne, James was a politically astute and relatively experienced ruler. The death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, without an heir, set the stage for James's ascension to the English throne. Elizabeth's lack of a direct successor led to the question of succession, which was a subject of considerable political intrigue throughout her reign. As the great-great-grandson of Henry VII, through his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, James had a strong claim to the English throne. Elizabeth had carefully refrained from naming a successor, but upon her death, James was declared King of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. This union of the crowns, though significant, did not result in a political union between the two kingdoms. England and Scotland continued to have separate parliaments, laws, and institutions for much of James's reign. However, the personal union of the crowns under James I marked a shift in the political landscape of both nations, and it laid the groundwork for the eventual political union in 1707. One of the defining issues of James's reign was religion. James, as a Protestant king, was confronted with the tensions between Catholics and Protestants that had plagued England for much of the preceding century. Elizabeth I's Protestant settlement had established the Church of England as the state religion, but this left many Catholics and radical Protestants, known as Puritans, dissatisfied. James's personal beliefs were somewhat moderate, and he hoped to bring religious harmony to England. He sought to manage the tensions between Anglicans, Puritans, and Catholics in ways that would preserve peace. Early in his reign, James I signalled a more tolerant approach by issuing the Declaration of Sports, 1617, which permitted public entertainment on Sundays and was viewed as a concession to the more moderate Anglicans and the general public. However, the Puritans, a growing faction of English Protestants who sought further reforms to the Church of England, were not satisfied with James's policies. They wanted a more radical reformation of the Church, including the elimination of Catholic rituals, the abolition of bishops, and a greater emphasis on the Bible and preaching. James, who believed in the divine right of kings and saw himself as the supreme governor of both church and state, was unwilling to make the concessions they demanded. He famously remarked that no bishop, no king, emphasizing his belief that royal authority and the authority of the Church were intertwined. In contrast to the Puritans, English Catholics remained discontented under James's rule, especially since the English government continued to impose harsh restrictions on Catholic practices. The most infamous of these Catholics were the conspirators involved in the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. A group of Catholic radicals, including Guy Fawkes, attempted to assassinate James I by blowing up the House of Lords with gunpowder in an effort to replace him with a Catholic monarch. The plot failed, and the conspirators were executed. This event further strained the relationship between the monarchy and English Catholics. James's stance on religion was one of compromise. He hoped to maintain peace between the different factions, but his policies often failed to satisfy either side completely. Despite his attempts at conciliation, religious divisions persisted throughout his reign, and these tensions would continue to affect the monarchy even after his death. Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of James I's reign is the King James Bible, also known as the Authorized Version. Commissioned by James in 1604, the translation was intended to be an authoritative and accessible version of the Bible for English-speaking Protestants. The project brought together a group of the best scholars, theologians, and translators of the time, who worked to produce a version of the Bible that could be used in churches across England. The King James Bible was published in 1611, and it quickly became the most widely used and influential English translation of the Bible. Its poetic and majestic language had a profound impact on English literature, shaping the way the English language was used in both religious and secular contexts. It is still revered today for its literary beauty and theological clarity. The commissioning of the Bible also reflected James's belief in the importance of religious unity. By creating a version of the Bible that could be accepted by all Protestant factions in England, he hoped to foster a sense of national religious identity and strengthen the authority of the Church of England. James's relationship with Parliament was one of the most contentious aspects of his reign. As a firm believer in the divine right of kings, James saw himself as answerable only to God, and believed that he had the right to rule without interference from Parliament. He famously stated that he was the Lord's anointed, and that the power of the monarch was divinely ordained. This belief in absolute monarchy often put him at odds with Parliament, which sought to limit royal power and protect its own privileges. One of the key issues between James and Parliament was the question of taxation. James's financial policies were seen as inefficient, and his extravagant lifestyle and reliance on royal prerogative led to frequent clashes with Parliament over funding. James's inability to secure a stable financial system and his demands for taxes led to tensions between the monarchy and Parliament, culminating in the Great Protestation of 1621. In which Parliament asserted its rights to discuss matters of policy, including foreign affairs and royal finances. James's desire to maintain his royal prerogative and his belief in his divine right often led him to bypass Parliament altogether. This disregard for parliamentary authority would have long-lasting consequences, particularly for his son and successor, Charles I, whose own struggles with Parliament would lead to the outbreak of the English Civil War. James's colonial ambitions began to take shape. The first permanent English colony in the Americas, Jamestown, was established in Virginia in 1607, named in honor of the king. The colony faced many challenges, including starvation, disease, and conflicts with indigenous peoples, but it laid the foundation for England's eventual colonial empire in the Americas. James's reign also saw the expansion of England's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. The Royal African Company, established in 1672, after James's death, would play a significant role in the transportation of enslaved Africans to the Americas. While this development occurred after James's death, his reign nevertheless marked the beginning of England's involvement in the global slave trade, which would have profound social, economic, and moral implications in the centuries that followed. James I died on March 27, 1625, after a reign of 22 years. He was succeeded by his son, Charles I, whose reign would be marked by even greater tensions between the monarchy and Parliament. James's attempts to assert the divine right of kings and his conflicts with Parliament set the stage for the political struggles that would define the 17th century.